What is up, guys? I want to redo a comparison that I did around 6 months ago, the LG G8 versus the LG G7. So I did this before it got the Android 10 update on the G7, that is. And I want to go ahead and talk about these two phones. If you're trying to decide, should you spend a little extra money to get the G8 or should you, get the G7? Now let's go ahead and talk about price. So there is a price difference here, and we're going to start with the G7. So I will put the links down below. On Amazon, you can get the G7 for around 200 bucks renewed right now. Sometimes it's even a little bit cheaper depending on if you want it unlocked or locked. If you want it locked on Verizon, for instance, it's going to be 175, and so the prices do vary on that one. But if you want a new G8, they're kind of hard to find right now, but they're usually somewhere around like 250 or something like that. So for the G8, it is a kind of a bigger difference here with the price. So if you want a renewed version of the G8, the lowest is around 260 to 290. So if you want a brand new G8, it's going to cost you anywhere between $400 to $500 on Amazon, which I think the phone is still really good for 400 bucks, most definitely. But those are the prices, so there is kind of a difference here. All right, so starting off with the hardware, these are two similar phones. So you have pretty much kind of a similar design, but of course the G8 does look a little bit cleaner, and that's definitely due to the flat camera design. It's something that I just really love. They're both glass and metal phones, and they both feel just excellent in the hand. They're both IP68 dust and water resistant, so you can get these phones wet and they will not break at all, which is something that I really love. Now, one of the first essential differences with both of these phones are the displays. So on the G8, you have a 6.1 inch OLED display. It's 1440p 564 for the PPI. So on the G7, you have an IPS display, 6.1 inch 1440p 564 for the PPI. So same resolution, same PPI, but different display technology. In my opinion, the OLED display does definitely look better here. Colors are more accurate, and it's actually a brighter display compared to the G7's IPS display. As far as quality and just like the pixels and clarity, they both look really good. So some advantages of an IPS display is that you won't get the screen burn problem like you will on an OLED display. So if you ever notice, you go on not Amazon but eBay and you see phones with like the screen burns, you won't have that issue most likely on an IPS display, but you will notice the difference in color accuracy and just overall brightness here. Now let's talk about the software. So you're running Android 10 on both of these phones, and the experience is very smooth. You have the Snapdragon 855 on the G8 and the Snapdragon 845 on the G7, Adreno 630 on the G7, and Adreno 640. As you can see from the benchmark, you're going to get better performance or better scores on the G8, but in the real world, honestly, you're not going to notice a huge difference between performance between these two chips, even with gaming. Now if you're a gamer, I will say that they both play games on high: Call of Duty, Fortnite, PUBG, but I do think the A55 is definitely handles Fortnite better than the G7. There's not as much lag or frame rate drops, so that is one thing I noticed. So if you're a serious gamer, then the G8 is definitely going to be a little bit better here. Now both of these phones have NFC. They both have the 3.5mm jack with the quad DAC, so very high quality audio. Here's where the G7 has an advantage. The speaker is definitely louder, and it's just overall better quality to me. So that is one thing that I really like about the G7. Even though the G8 still has a really super solid speaker, it's just not as good as the G7's. So you have micro SD support on both of these phones, 128 gigs and 6 gigs on the base model on the G8, and then you have 64 gigs and 4 gigs on the G7. So you get more storage, more RAM on the G8 here. Now you have a dual camera setup on both of these phones. Starting with the G8, it's a 12 megapixel standard, 16 megapixel ultra wide. You get 4K video, 30 or 60 FPS. You also have an 8 megapixel camera up front that shoots 1080p. Now just to talk about the G8's photos before we get to the G7, these are some great photos here with the stock camera app and with the Gcam application. If you download that, you're going to get some excellent photos, very color accurate, very good detail. Depth of field is there, dynamic range is awesome. It's just overall some super solid cameras, and like I said, with that Gcam application, it's going to be really awesome. Now on the G7 you have a 16 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. You also do 4K 30 or 60 fps and an 8 megapixel camera up front. Now the G8 stock camera app is better, but when you put the G7s on Gcam, then you get some really close shots with the G8. The quality does bump up significantly. So I used to say that the G8's camera is much better on a stock camera level, but once you download that Gcam, they're almost pretty much tied in quality, as you can see here. So you just get some really excellent shots on the G7 as well with that application. Now let's go ahead and talk about battery life. So you do have a 3,500 milliamp battery on the G8. Does have the 21 watt fast charging and wireless charging, and you get around 8 hours and 30 minutes of screen on time. On the G7 it's a 3,000 milliamp battery, 18 watt fast charging and wireless charging. Now the big difference here is the screen on time. I've done battery drain tests on both of these. You're getting around 6 hours and 30 minutes on the G7, so definitely much better battery life on the G8. So if you need a phone that's really going to last you, then the G8 is definitely great for that. So two super solid phones. It really depends on what you really like. I just really love the speakers on the G7, but the display is just really king for me. So I know somebody's gonna ask. I'm definitely would go spend a little extra money for the G8 with the OLED and the 855 chip. I think it's worth it. What do you guys think? Let me know, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.